This is WESH-TV, Channel 2, Daytona Beach, Orlando, Florida.
Good evening. Dean Todd's on vacation. I'm Scott Harris. A NATO communications satellite blasted into orbit tonight on time after the scheduled launch was delayed from Wednesday. But tonight, under the lights at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, the Delta rocket lifted its payload off on time at 7:46.
4, 3, 2, 1. Engine start, and we have liftoff of Delta 146 carrying NATO 3C.
The communications satellite will be used by NATO forces in Europe as a backup to other satellites already in position. Officials say all went well on tonight's mission. The satellite weighs 3/4 of a ton. It's the largest payload ever carried by a Delta booster. The launch had been delayed because of conflicts and the use of ground equipment in a Navy Trident missile test launch. That Trident lifted off yesterday afternoon. Police in the South African nation of Guyana say U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan was shot and perhaps killed along with others in his party in a shootout at a landing strip. Ryan, a Democrat from California, was on a mission there to check reports that Americans were being kept prisoner in a jungle religious colony. Police say about 20 people were killed in a gunfight at a local airport in a remote area. In Ryan's party were U.S. Embassy personnel, American reporters, and 2 of the congressman's aides. Details are still coming in at this hour. The Ryan party was reportedly hit by heavy fire, which suddenly erupted from a tractor-trailer parked near 2 planes. One pilot said pistol shots apparently were a signal for attack by a group of armed men in a nearby tractor-trailer. Ryan had flown to the jungle mission Friday, that along with embassy personnel, 2 aides, 4 journalists, and a 4-person NBC TV camera crew. He had gone to check reports at some of the 1,100 persons at the People's Temple religious colony at Jonestown, that named after the self-styled Reverend Jim Jones of San Francisco. Reports were that several people, or a number of people, were being kept against their will in that colony. 9 or 10 of the religious converts had apparently decided to return with Ryan to the United States, and the entire party of about 25 persons was boarding the planes at the time of the attack. Again, details still sketchy. U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan of California apparently shot, perhaps killed, in a gunfight in a remote landing strip in South America. Another news, Moscow admitted today that there are Soviet MiG-23 jet fighters in Cuba. That's causing new concern in Washington. Republican National Chairman Bill Brock has called on President Carter to reaffirm the policy against offensive weapons in Cuba. That agreement with the Soviet Union developed during the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. The Soviets say the MiG-23s are there for defensive purposes only. America's position is not yet clear. Good morning. It's 7:25 and I'm Scott Harris. Another cold morning in Central Florida, but not near as cold as it has been for the past 2 days. It is warming up. Here's the way the temperatures look across the state right now. Most of them 10 to 15 degrees or warmer than it was at this time yesterday. Orlando reporting 36, also 36 at the Cape, 38 at Melbourne, 34 Daytona Beach. Gainesville with 30 degrees, 24 in Jacksonville, 33 in Tampa. The state's electric power companies, though, are still asking customers to conserve, especially this morning during the heavy demand period. Both Florida Power and Light and Florida Power Corporation had to institute rotating blackouts yesterday because they couldn't keep up with the demand. They hope that won't be necessary today, but they've already told their larger commercial customers to cut back drastically where they can. Florida's citrus growers are in a race against time. Processing plants will be working full bore on the oranges that were frozen solid by the hard Christmas freeze. The problem now is warm weather. If it warms up, the citrus will spoil quicker. That much more of the crop will be lost before it can be converted to frozen orange juice concentrate. Fern growers in northwest Volusia County are estimating they've lost as much as half of their $60 million a year crop to the freeze. Growers have told News Center 2 the last 2 days have been worse than they've ever seen in their many years of growing those plants. It was a gloomy Christmas weekend for the families of 7 people in Florida who were killed because of the cold weather. The victims of the freeze included 3 Miami men, 2 men in Jacksonville, 1 in Tampa. Also, 79-year-old Gussie Dunn of Tampa was killed in a fire started by her gas heater. The other deaths were caused by exposure to the cold. Cold weather also caused some water problems yesterday. In Orlando alone, the fire department received 38 calls about broken pipes. That in both commercial and in residential areas. One of the biggest problems in the Pan Am building in downtown Orlando. There was quite a bit of water damage as pipes froze and flooded that building. In fact, the water was 2 to 3 inches deep near the vault. Partly cloudy and warmer, the outlook for Central Florida today. Look at that, 55 degrees. Haven't seen that in a long time. That's our expected high. Lows around 40. Winds from the east at about 10 to 15 miles an hour. The boating forecast from St. Augustine to Jupiter Inlet, 10 to 15 knot winds from the east, 3 to 5 foot seas. 55 degrees in the water, still a bit chilly. Low tide this morning at Ponce Inlet at 8:40. High tide this afternoon at 2:36. Sunset tonight at 5:34. Tomorrow morning, sunrise comes at 7:18. Here are our current temperatures again. 36 in both Orlando and at the Cape, 38 Melbourne, 34 in Daytona Beach. Gainesville reporting 30 degrees, up to 56 degrees in Key West this morning. That's where we'll go swimming. We'll be back with more news at 8:25. Good evening and welcome to At Issue. I'm Scott Harris. Tonight we have a one-on-one interview with a special guest, Congressman John Mica, elected last year to his first term in the Congress from Florida's new 7th Congressional District, a Republican. The district runs from Orlando to Daytona Beach, although it doesn't really encompass either of those cities. It's kind of a suburban district.
It goes from one end to the other. But I'm glad to be with you, Scott, and look forward to discussing some of the issues that have been before the Congress and will be before the Congress in the upcoming year.
Good. I'm glad to have you. Just as a quick background, your background is in business and in government. You are not an attorney.
That's right.
My father would appreciate that very much. The chief.
I have a lot of company, though, with over 200 attorneys in Congress.
Yeah, there are quite a few. You were the chief of staff for Senator Paula Hawkins in the early 80s, and you were in the Florida House of Representatives for 4 years in the late 70s. As I said, you were newly elected. You are a Republican congressman. You're a freshman. The Democrats have taken over the White House in the administration for the first time in a dozen years. How was your first year?
Well, it was sort of like a ride on a wild roller coaster out at Disney or one of the attractions. I guess President Clinton and his wife Hillary have kept it exciting just about every week.
You've had issues to vote on, big important issues or high-profile issues?
That's right, high-profile, and we hear from Floridians and from people of the 7th Congressional District. They're very anxious about some of the things that have taken place and concerned, and they do write and call. So it's been a very active session. We've tackled some controversial issues and some that have made a number of the headlines.
Well, let's hit on one of the more recent high-profile issues and touch on that, the NAFTA treaty, the North American Free Trade Agreement. Your vote on that was against.
Yes, I voted against NAFTA. Actually, when you look at the legislation that was before us, and we really only had 3 documents that we were dealing with. One was the enabling legislation, the other was the side agreements, and of course the treaty itself. Having worked in international trade and represented a number of companies in the international arena, I looked at it pretty closely, and I thought overall it was a great deal for Mexico, but it was a bad deal for the United States and the tax.
A deadly accident on I-4 this morning near SeaWorld when a tanker truck drove off an overpass. The driver was killed in the accident, but fortunately other lives were saved because the truck missed the interstate. Channel 6 News reporter Scott Harris has that story.
Hazmat teams didn't know it at first, but the driver had already emptied his load of aviation fuel. Only a few gallons remained. They also didn't know right away how the truck got here. It had fallen from the overpass. Tourists Larry and Diane Krause saw it happen.
As soon as he came down off the bridge, I knew there was no way anybody could survive that.
When we saw him come down.
Describe that for me. What did you see?
It's just like he drove off the edge.
This is the road he was driving on, the B-line exit off onto I-4 westbound, much like these cars. For whatever reason, investigators tell us he apparently hit the left retaining wall first, then bounced across the road and went over the right one.
We ran to assist, but some other people ran down to check his pulse, but there wasn't any, so.
Feel helpless?
Yeah, there's nothing you can do.
It was raining heavily at the time, and investigators say that may well have been a factor. They don't think the driver was speeding, but they don't know yet why he hit the wall. Scott Harris, Channel 6 News.
The driver has been identified as 49-year-old Gary Rice of Hillsborough County. He had emptied his load of fuel at Patrick Air Force Base and was on his way back to Tampa.
Tell you what, we have the election supervisor from Volusia County on the phone right now, Deanie Lowe. Deanie, former county council member, election supervisor for a number of years. Deanie, this is Scott Harris. Are you there?
Hi, Scott.
How are you?
I'm here. I just can't seem to get away from this place.
No, they keep you busy. Once every 4, actually more often than that. It's not fair to say once every 4 years, but it has been an interesting night in Volusia County. It has been an interesting night statewide. What can you tell us?
Are we on the air right now?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
Okay. I had another phone call that was urgent.
Oh, I know. You're going back and forth. I'm sure everybody wants to talk to you. First of all, there was before we get to that, first thing, you are an election supervisor. Maybe you can help us with this 0.5% thing. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I'm sorry.
I don't know if you can hear me.
I can't hear you. Say it again.
The word, of course, the whole country knows now that in Florida, if the difference between two candidates is less than 0.5%, there is an automatic recount. That has happened locally under your watch, has it not?
Yes.
And this is by law. It's automatic.
That's correct. In the state of Florida, the Division of Elections, I'm sure, will notify the supervisors throughout the state tomorrow if there is a need for an automatic recount.
Let me ask you something. How long will that take? Do you know?
Oh, I'm not sure at this point.
But they won't get the request until tomorrow, and so the recount will take a little time. What is involved in that, in a recount? Do you run the ballots back through the machines again? Is that how that works?
Well, I will be conferring with the other supervisors around the state with the same type of system, and we will make sure that all of our procedures are the same.
All right, so we're all going to learn here over the next couple days, I guess, exactly what's going on. And with one precinct still out, just one precinct out of 5,884, the vote totals that we have, the vote totals from Tallahassee, from that same elections office, have them virtually tied. Kind of failure of the heat shield system. We've talked about that ever since the space program started, although we've never had a problem like this. Certainly that is why they designed the heat tiles and the heat shield systems, is to prevent, because they have always told us if in fact there is no heat shielding, what will happen is it will burn up. Whatever the spacecraft is coming in will burn up like a meteorite. And certainly something of the shape of the shuttle, if it begins to burn up, it is not to be unexpected that parts of it will break off, that it would break. So that seems to be a scientifically feasible explanation, and that's as far as I really want to go with it. But I think most of us, that's what you're looking at. You're saying, what could have happened? And when you start thinking that through, and from what we do know just in general about space flight and about what they've done and about the landing, certainly people who live it, and that's what we'll be hearing from NASA, these scientists who actually work it, will be able to give us much more. But certainly, as we've studied it over the years, it's always been a concern.
Yes.
Re-entry and coming back to Earth is dangerous. It's like flying in a plane. The takeoff and the landing are the most dangerous parts. We've tended to concentrate on the liftoff because it probably is more dangerous than landing. But that is the dangerous part of the landing. That part where you are coming and reaching the atmosphere. Once you really get down where you're flying at a speed where they can control it, it's just a question of the pilot bringing it in to the landing, and these guys know how to do that. And as in fact, the shuttle electronics can do it without the pilot. The pilot has to put the wheels down, believe it or not. But other than that, and then apply the brakes. But other than that, the shuttle can land itself automatically, although they don't. I mean, the commanders land them. If you remember in Challenger, and it was the seal around in the solid rocket boosters. I bring
Bring the model out.
All right, we are told shuttle keeps about 10 minutes out. I'll bring my model up here again and ask our camera people to do a little camera work. But this is the shuttle sitting on the launch pad. And in Challenger, and I believe it was on this side, in Challenger, this is the solid rocket booster up and down the side. That is a solid fuel rocket. It's filled with solid fuel. You'll notice, and it's a little hard to see here, down here you can see it, there's a ring around it. This is not actually one piece, it is several sections. So at various points here, there are seals where they are sealed together. And what happened is, because I don't remember the exact temperature, it was very cold that morning, and as you know, your tires or your rubber, it'll shrink.
It was a January morning.
Right. And there was a leak. But what happened, because it took off from the pad, they had the video, and as it went up, when they went back and reviewed, they could see in the close-up video, there were little flashes coming out there, so they know what was going on.
Yeah.
They could actually see it, and I think that's what Catherine Harr was referring to. Here, we're talking, of course, just the shuttle probably coming in at about this angle. It comes in nose up at about 40 degrees at that height. but it was 200,000 feet up. The best photography you've got is just show a spark, just a flash up there.
Right.
So you're going to have to rely on the telemetry, the data that comes back from the shuttle, the data that was sent, and so forth and so on. And we'll just have to see.
Orlando's race for City Hall. News 13's Candidate Roundtable. Now, here's Scott Harris.
Welcome to Orlando's Race for City Hall Candidate Roundtable. I am Scott Harris. And over the next hour, we hope to provide some insight into the platforms and character of the men who would be mayor. There are 2 men left in the race. 6 candidates were eliminated on February 4th. The 2 are in the studio with us. Pete Barr, an advertising agency executive who's never held public office, elective office, and Buddy Dyer, a lawyer who served as a state senator from the Orlando area for 10 years. And joining me in questioning the candidates is Mark Sloob, the Orlando City Hall reporter for the Orlando Sentinel. We're calling this a roundtable, not a debate, not a forum. We hope it'll be more like a conversation with the candidates, and because of that, there are no rules, no equal time provisions, no timing, hopefully few formalities, with one exception. At the end of the show, we're going to offer 2.5 minutes for each of the candidates to make a closing statement. As for the rest of the show, I'll be leading and directing the conversation. It'll be my job to keep things fair and informative. The goal, learning as much as we can about these 2 men and what they plan to do as mayor. We encourage you gentlemen to talk to each other as well as to talk to us. Gentlemen, I want to thank you both. Pete Barr, Buddy Dyer, Mark Sloob, thank you so much for being here and joining us. Let me close here. I'm going to close with a few personal observations. I've covered a lot of political campaigns in my years as a journalist. I was involved in a congressional campaign almost 20 years ago, not as the candidate. But the political process is, as others have observed, not necessarily a pretty process, a robust process, and certainly not a perfect process, but it is what we have. And it works. It works if the average citizen gets involved. First Amendment of the Constitution is freedom of speech. It's there not because our founding fathers were concerned about Mark's ability to publish or my ability to broadcast. They were concerned about every citizen's right to hear all sorts of differing views. They felt an educated citizenry has the ability to sort through it all, come up with their own decision on the truth. That's what this is all about. At least that's the way I learned it. I urge you to vote on Tuesday. We've talked about the city lines. Make sure that you live within the city. Check your voter registration card. If you are a citizen of the city, do vote. If you're not, but you think you are, maybe that'll be changed by the time we have a next election. Maybe not. We'll be here on Central Florida News 13 Tuesday night, of course, at 7 when the polls close to report the results to you. Gentlemen, let me wish you the best. Thank you for standing before the voters, and keep the dialogue up. For Sky, for Central Florida News 13, I'm Scott Harris. Thank you all.
We are understanding we're going to have a briefing or a meeting or something from the Orange County Emergency Operations Center. That should be coming up in the next 15 minutes or so, about 3:15. We'll bring you as much of that as we can, or bring you the results from that. We're trying to keep track of all the information from wherever it's coming from and passing it on. The main thing, of course, is tracking the storm, knowing that this is a serious hurricane. At last report, a Category 4 hurricane that on current track is going to come right through Central Florida. The current track brings it essentially down I-4, and it's going to run from Orlando to Daytona Beach in almost a straight line. At least that's the way it looks. That will vary. It will jog back and forth, but the main thing is if it comes close, we're going to get some serious winds and damage. Anybody who's living in a mobile home, manufactured home, these 4 counties you see there, Volusia, Seminole, Orange, and Osceola, have ordered mandatory evacuations. You need to get out of your mobile home. It will be dangerous. You're talking about serious winds, heavy rains. You've got a storm coming through here. We're expecting hurricane force winds. Those facilities are not built to withstand that.
Let's see if we can get some latest coordinates and the track of this very powerful Hurricane Charley. Let's
Dave Cocciarella, you were over there. I did some calculations, Dave, when based on that track, and you were talking about the hours and when it would hit various places. On the current track, starting at 8 o'clock tonight, that spot that the National Weather Service gave us, which would be 74 miles south-southwest of Orlando roughly, hitting Orlando about 11 o'clock. Osteen around midnight,
Okay, Scott, we can go ahead and put this up graphically while you go through this. We'll go ahead and cycle over to that.
If you want to do that.
Let's just go ahead and get it graphically so we can see it. Thanks, guys.
Okay, sorry about that, Dave.
No, that's all right.
Yeah, I'm stepping ahead of you here.
No. Let's just.
We'll get to the. But it was something you were mentioning earlier, and again, this is just
okay. So here we go. Here we go. So now
based on that
so
track
this is
down
8
there.
o'clock.
8 o'clock.
And that's how far south of Orlando?
74 miles southwest of Orlando.
Okay, and so then where are we at 9 o'clock?
9 o'clock, where I didn't actually plot at 9 o'clock, so you can pick there. But at 10 o'clock, I've got 11 miles southwest of Kissimmee. So it's still southwest of Kissimmee in Osceola County at 10 o'clock. Right, in that area. Right. 11 o'clock would be right in Orlando. I mean, within 2 miles of downtown Orlando.